A forgotten trailhead deep in the Texas wilderness awakens. A cursed path where reality unravels through whispered woods in a terrifying ASMR sleep horror story, woven with soft-spoken storytelling and immersive dread. You re-listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I always thought trailheads were the safest place in the woods. You know, those open gravel patches where the forest hadn't fully claimed its stake yet, with signs everywhere, parking spots, maybe even a bathroom if you're lucky. That false sense of security settles in like morning fog, makes you think you'll walk into the trees and come back the same. Why never came back the same. It started in West Texas, Guadalupe Mountains National Park, dry, wind-bitten terrain where the sun bleaches bone and memory alike. I was solo hiking as usual, 1 week off. No work calls, no social media, just me and the silence. But this time, I picked a trail I hadn't seen on any official maps. The ranger at the visitor center raised a brow when I asked about it too. "Sure, you read that right," he said, pulling his glasses down to look at my crumpled note. "Ain't no trail called Devil's Backbone out here, not officially." Showed him the photo, a faded wood sign that said exactly that right below. Bent iron post and a red bleached trail marker shaped like a goat's skull. He went quiet. His mouth twitched like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Sometimes locals make their own trails, he muttered, sliding the photo back. "That ain't park maintained. You go up there, you're on your own." That's what I wanted, so I went. Entrance was a narrow slit in the limestone ridge, barely wide enough to squeeze my pack through, and the second I stepped past the shadow line into the cleft, the wind just stopped. I didn't notice it at first, not until I realized how loud my breathing sounded. Like every inhale scraped the rocks, every exhale echoed back. Wrong, slower, off time, like the canyon was holding its breath until mine ran out. Path climbed fast, dust-coated switchbacks zigzagged between broken trees and splintered roots. The soil was cracked and dry, but it wasn't the regular red clay. It was black, dry like char, and there were shapes in the dirt, faint outlines, hooves. Cloven eye. Told myself they were deer prints, mule deer. Maybe big ones, but some were too wide, too deep, and they ran in Night fell. The trail opened into a clearing where the ground was so flat it felt artificial. There was a wooden post in the center, cracked from weather or something worse. No plaque, no instructions, just a red twine rope looped around it, nailed in 5 places. Like a star or a seal. I didn't sleep. There, I pushed on, even though I was exhausted, but every mile deeper. The trees thinned into spindly shapes, long-armed junipers that didn't seem to grow, just hunch. Their bark was twisted, peeled back like skin. It was around 2 a.m. when I saw the second sign carved into a standing stone about 4 feet high, jutting from the center of the path. No lettering this time, just 3 lines. "Turn around now, turn around before you sleep and dream." Here I didn't know what the hell it meant, but it stopped me. I stood there for 15 minutes, just breathing into the dark. No birds, no wind, no bugs. Even my water bottle was silent in my pack, like the woods had vacuumed out the world. I should have turned around, but I was stubborn, curious, stupid too. Miles later, I saw the first thing that made me feel real fear. There was a tent, half collapsed, bleached by sun and time. It was set up right next to a tree, whose limbs had curled downward like fingers pressed to a mouth. The tent was zip-tied. Called out, thinking maybe it was a ranger station or someone in answer. So I unzipped it. Inside was a sleeping bag, empty, and next to it, a small pile of drawings each. One was the same shape, a circle with a face, but the face had no eyes, just a line for a mouth, sometimes curved into a smile, sometimes stretched wide, like a scream, sometimes teeth, far too many teeth. I took one photo, just one, and as the flash went off, I heard something behind me, not a twig snap, not footsteps, was a voice say, whisper, but it was whispering with my voice. You don't want to go further. Turned around, nothing, no wind, no one, just the crushed grass where I had walked. Eni didn't sleep that night. I kept walking, hiking by flashlight, by panic, by raw instinct that something wasn't right behind. At some point I must have blacked out, because I woke up at dawn on the ground with no memory of stopping, and the trail was gone, not overgrown, not blocked, gone. The dust was smooth around me like nothing had passed through in years even. My own prints were gone, and when I turned around to backtrack, the trees weren't the same. They were closer, not metaphorically, literally. The trunks had shifted, bent, reached across the path like they'd grown overnight in ways they weren't supposed to, and something was hanging from one, a ribbon, red twine, just like the one from the post, tonally. Now it was tied in a knot that looked like a noose. There was a tag on it, written in Sharpied. Did you dream? I hadn't, not yet, but I felt sleep pressing behind my eyes. Deep, hot pressure, like a fever waiting to break. I drank the rest of my water and forced myself to move, but I wasn't going forward anymore. I didn't care about summiting. I just wanted off that trail. It wouldn't let my every direction looped back. GPS was useless. Compass spun in tight, jittery circles. The sun was in the wrong place every hour. I even tried walking straight downhill. No trail, no markings, and still wound up back at that same clearing with the post, but the post wasn't empty anymore. There was something nailed to it. The photo I took of the drawing from the tent, printed on glossy potpourri, didn't have signal. I hadn't uploaded it anywhere. My phone was off when I passed out. So how did it get there, and why was the figure's mouth smiling wider? Now that night, I couldn't stop. The dream didn't begin like any dream I'd ever had before. There was no blurring, no confusion, no strange symbols or shifting scenes. I was just there, back on the trail, but without my body, floating above myself, watching my sleeping form was curled on the cracked dirt, arms crossed over my chest, mouth twitching like it wanted to scream but couldn't. And above me the sky had changed. The stars were missing, every single one. Just a flat dome of deep red, like sunset, frozen in place. And from that sky things were hanging, not stars, not clouds, bodies, but they weren't human anymore. They had the outline, the limbs, the silhouette, but their skin was bark, their fingers twined, their faces that same circle, no eyes, just a mouth. Every one of them wore a different expression, a gallery of anguish and confusion, and something worse. And then the trees began to breathe. Every single one in the forest exhaled at once a deep groaning sound that rattled inside. Me, not wind, not pressure. It was grief, something, ancient something watching. Then I saw it, the thing that made everything real in the worst possible way. There was a figure in the distance, standing just past a crooked ridge of dead shrubs. It was tall, easily 8 feet or more, dressed in layers that didn't match a ranger hat, a poncho, a flannel shirt wrapped around its waist like a belted skin. Wasn't skin, it was parchment, yellowed, stitched together, written on in dozens of hands it turned toward. Menno eyes, just that wide ink-black mouth, and then it opened its chest. Not metaphorically, it peeled its ribs apart like old wooden shutters. Side wasn't blood or bone, it was paper, hundreds of sheets layered on each other, filled with faces drawn in charcoal. And I watched as my own face appeared. On one mouth closed, then open, screaming. I woke up vomiting dry, heaving into dust that smelled like scorched meat and copper. My throat was raw, like I'd been shouting for hours, but I hadn't made a sound. On the ground next to me was a drawing, same Bass, the other's circle face, no eyes, mouth wide open, and underneath it was a name, Ali Reyes. That's my name, no one knew. I was here, no one knew this trail even existed. Dye tore the drawing to pieces, burned the scraps, buried the ashes, and when I stood to run, I saw something worse than all of it. There were other tents, no savannah, of them identical each, one zipped, and I knew without opening them that each one had a drawing in stitch. One had a name, and if I unzipped any of them, I'd see someone wake up. So by identity ran, but running didn't help. Everywhere I turned, the trail bent back around, like the landscape was folding on itself. I passed the same gnarled tree 3 times in different directions, the same dead squirrel, the same red ribbon tie to a pine, only now it was fresh, wetted. Then the sky darkened again, not night, it was blinking like the entire world was an eye, slowly closing, and every time it blinked, the forest changed things, movitants, vanished trees, lind not fallen, bentai was losing time. My beard was longer, my water was gone, my lips cracked, I had bruises I didn't remember getting, and one morning there was another photo nailed to the post, but this one wasn't from my phone. It was a picture of me sleeping from above, just like the dream, same angle, same posture, same eerie red light. I had never taken it, and below the photo, in thick black marker, were 3 words here, almost paper. That night I didn't sleep. I chewed bitter leaves, bit my own wrist, anything to stay awake, because I knew if I dreamed again, I wouldn't wake up the same. I would become one of them. I would fade, but I did dream. I couldn't stop it, and this time I wasn't floating. I was walking with the tall figure, moved like a glider across the trail, dragging a long stick across the dirt behind it. As it walked, the trees bowed toward it, whispering. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt them like cold breath on the inside of my ribs. It stopped by a stone, just like the warning marker earlier, Only this one had a hollow carved into it, a perfect circle. The figure turned to me and whispered, not in my voice, this time in every voice I'd ever known it, said the trailhead never ends, it only forgets youth. Then it placed a drawing into the stone, and I watched as the paper burned not into ash, but into memory. The drawing erased itself and the trail behind. It vanished like it had never existed. When I woke, the ground was warm to warm. I dug into it, just an inchward old planks, like a buried floor. I dug more, until I saw gaps between the slats, and from below I heard breathing, a soft, slow whisper, repeating my name. Please remember me, please don't let it forget. And then a second voice followed, the same one from my dreams, low, cracked, ancient almost. Then I heard paper being pulled tight, something tearing die. Ran again, screaming, blind, crashing through trees, thorns in my arms, sweat pouring down my back. And then I saw the sign, not wood, not metal, digital, a glowing green trail counter, half buried in vines and rust, reading total lost 73, total found 0. Then it blinked, total lost 74 that night. I didn't sleep. I jammed sticks under my nails, crushed ants between my fingers, anything to keep my mind awake, because I knew what came next if I dream again. Forget everything and become part of the trail tomorrow. I'll tell you what finally found me, what dragged me the rest of the way, and how I didn't escape on my own. I didn't sleep that night, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't feel safe enough to even blink. The trees moved when I wasn't looking. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, long spindly limbs reaching in directions they couldn't have grown, branches curling like knuckles, tightening with each second I stood still. My skin itched like it was being read, like the name beneath my bones was rising toward the surface, trying to be known, trying to be taken. I walked in circles for what felt like hours or days. The sun didn't rise, the moon didn't fall. Time stretched thin and quiet and wrong. Then the trail changed again, not gradually, just all at one side. Blinked, and I wasn't in the woods anymore. I was standing in a dry, open field, surrounded by scorched grass and miles of silence, nothing but wind and heat, and a single broken building at the center. It was an old ranger station, leaning to one side, sun-bleached roof peeled half away, dust covering its broken steps like it hadn't been touched in decades. Walked toward it because I had nowhere else to go. Inside was cool, too cool, like the air didn't belong there, like it came from somewhere else. The walls were covered in maps, dozens of them, all hand-drawn, none matched real locations. I checked every one, names scribbled in shaky letters, trails that didn't exist on any government record, trails like the Whisper Line, the Red Mercy, the Hollowed Way, and the one I already knew too well, the Devil's Backbone. Then I saw it in the far corner of the room, an old CB radio, deadened till it wasn't. It crackled once, then again, then it spoke in my voice, but not my tone, distant, detached, cracked like vinyl spinning backward due. Not enter the Devil's Backbone, Trailhead. Bliss, not maintain. Trailhead is not real. Trailhead is. Then it stopped. The door behind me slammed shut. I turned, but no one was there, only the dust curling in the sudden stillness. And when I turned back to the wall. A new map had appeared where there was only faded paint. Now there was ink spreading like veins, and in the center, a red dot pulsing gently with the words, "You are here then." The word underneath changed, remembered. The floor creaked beneath me. The walls whispered things I could almost understand, the same voices from the trail, from the trees, from the dreams I knew I couldn't stay in that building, so I ran back into the field, but the sky above me was wrong. It blinked again, and when it opened, everything around me was different now. The woods, not the field, a circle of dirt with trees at the edge standing like statues, and in the middle of that ring, the tall figure waited, its limbs folded like paper, its ribs tied together with red twine, its face bent forward, and this time it spoke. Out loud, not whispered, not dreamlike. Its voice was wind cracking between bones. It said, "You brought your name to Four." I stepped back, but there was no ground behind me, only more trail looping into itself. A spiral, a card. You kept it alive. You kept saying, it thinking, it feeding it. That's how it finds you, that's S. How it writes you down. It stepped forward slowly, every footfall shaking the dirt like thunder from underground, and it held something out in its hand, a paper. Still blank, it said, "This is the last page." I said nothing. I held my breath. I clenched my jaw. I dug my nails into my arms just to stay conscious. Then it tilted its head and waited. I didn't speak. I didn't blink, and the paper didn't move. The air held them behind me. I heard them, the two others, the lost, the ones I had passed, the ones who had whispered my name in my sleep, the ones sewn shut and swallowed by trees there. Voices rose like wind caught in thousands of mouths, all saying the same thing over and over again. Forget yourself. Forget yourself. Forget yourself. And I finally understood. The only way to leave, the only way to escape the trail was not to fight, not to run, but to forget. Forget my name, forget the paper, forget my reason for coming, forget who I was. So I dropped my pack, I tore my ED, buried my journal, I closed my eyes and let the whispers take everything, and the world faded when I opened my eyes again. I was lying at the base of a dry stone hill near the park's southern border, covered in ash. No trail signs, no footprints, no paper, just my hands shaking and my skin clean like it had been wiped blank. I stumbled into the nearest outpost, half delirious, dehydrated. They told me I must have gotten lost, must have wandered off trail, must have had a breakdown. They said there's no devil's backbone on any of the maps. But I know what I saw, know what I heard, and weeks later, I got a letter with no name and no return. Address inside was a single piece of old yellow paper, blank, except at the bottom where someone had written in careful black ink, "You were almost paper." The first time I heard about the Shivering Stones trailhead, it came from a man sitting alone on a plastic lawn chair behind the gas station in Darby, Montana. He wasn't working there. He didn't even seem to be from town, but he looked at me like he knew where I was going before I said a word. "You heading west into the Bitterroots?" he asked. Ty nodded. Without even thinking, he just smirked and said, "You Take the wrong fork past Deep Widow Creek and the stones. Start following you. Then he laughed. Like it was a joke, but his eyes never smiled. I told myself it was just an old mountain story. The kind they tell tourists to keep them nervous and curious at the same time. But once I actually got up there, something felt off from the moment. My boots hit dirt, the shivering stones. Trailhead isn't marked on the official maps. It branches quietly off a well-used loop near Canyon Creek. And it doesn't announce itself with signs or rails or welcome boards. It's just there when you're alone there. Air shifted the second I stepped onto it. Not colder, not louder, just different, like I had moved through an invisible curtain. The trees were denser, tighter, closer than they looked from afar. Their branches hung low and slow, and the trail narrowed. Almost immediately, about an hour in, I started noticing them. The stones, they weren't part of the natural flow of the path. They stood out too perfectly round, too perfectly smooth, like river rocks, but bone pale and bone dry. And bone dry, and they weren't scattered, were placed little piles of them, 2 or 3 at a time. Always at the edge of my vision, just before the next turn, always where I'd have to pass by. Stopped at one of the stacks and crouched down. They weren't hot, they weren't cold, they were just stone, but something about them felt memorized, like they knew I was there. And every few feet, a new stack waited, already arranged, already balanced, never falling, no animals moved through the trees, no birds, no insects, just me and the sound of my boots against the dirt, and the whisper of leaves that never stopped moving, even when the air stood still. Then I found the first figure. Wasn't a person, it was made of sticks and rope, shaped like a crouching man with a stone face tied to the front, carved with no eyes, no mouth, just a row of teeth. Too many teeth. Walked past it, slowly, careful not to touch anything, and from behind. I swear I heard it creak, like the wood had shifted, like it had bent a little more forward. As I left, I should have turned back, right then, but the whisper started not from the trees, not from the ground, from the stones low. Soft, just barely louder than breath, and it said my name, not shouted, not cold, just whispered, like someone was repeating it behind my ear again, and again, and again. I kept walking like I didn't hear it, because if I responded, I knew it would get louder. Reached what I thought was the midpoint of the trail, but instead of a rest area or a sign, I found a clearing filled with hundreds of the white stones laid out in strange loops and spirals and broken symbols I couldn't recognize. They pulsed in the sunlight, not glowing, just shifting, like heat was rising off of them, but the air was cold, too cold for June, too cold for anything. I backed out of the clearing and took a wrong turn. The trail behind me was gone, not overgrown, not hidden, gone, and in its place was another path I hadn't seen before, lined with stones, all the way down both sides, leading deeper into the woods, and into something that felt more like inside than outside I didn't feel tired, but I could feel my body slowing down, like I was wading through thickening air. That's when I saw the second figure. It was taller, its stick frame broken at the middle spine, bent backward like it had been snapped during prayer, and its stone face was larger. with a new carving, a single line for an eye stretched across the top, and beneath it, a mouth that curved like a scream eye. Didn't move for what felt like minutes because it wasn't standing still, it was shivering. Not the leaves, not the wind, the figure itself was shaking. Barely visible, like a vibrating shadow, flickering faster than my eyes could process. And the whisper got louder. Turned and ran, but the trail didn't change, it didn't bend, it didn't offer any answer. Just led forward and forward and forward, always deeper, always quieter. The stones started to crack as I passed them, hairline fractures forming just as I walked by, like something inside was waking up because I was there. And then I saw Ita Cavor. Maybe the mouth of Sodomit was wide and shallow and covered in stone piles, dozens, hundreds, layered so tightly I couldn't see the wall underneath, and inside the entrance was the third figure. This one sat like a child, arms around its legs, head down, its stone face cracked through the middle like it had been dropped, and inside the crack was something darker than stoneland. It was weeping, not loudly, not emotionally, just constant, steady dripping. That didn't sound like tears. It sounded like someone crushing bone slowly in a bucket of water. I tried to step back, but my feet didn't lift. The whisper filled the cavern. This time it didn't say my name, it said come back, then it said stay then. It said remember, and my vision blurred, like the cave was breathing, like it was blinking with me inside its eyelid, and I knew I was walking again, without meaning to toward it, toward the weeping thing. The stones didn't stop me, the trees didn't close in, nothing tried to trap me because I was walking in on my own. That was what it wanted, that's what it waits for. And when I reached the mouth of the cave, the weeping stopped everything. Stopped, and the last thing I heard before the blackness took me was my own voice whispering from the stones, "We remember you." I didn't wake up in the cavey. Woke up outside it, lying flat on my back, with my backpack neatly placed beside me, and the sun too low in the sky. Checked my phone, and the date hadn't changed. Not the time either, as if no time had passed at all, but the trail was different. The trees were thinner, older, their bark stripped and cracked and pale. The stones were gone, no piles, no circles, no carvings, just dirt and wind and the scent of something burnt lingering in the air like cedar. And her eye started walking without really thinking about where I was headed, just trying to get back to the trailhead, trying to retrace the steps I didn't remember taking, and after maybe a mile I found the ranger station only. It wasn't on any map, I'd seen it. Sat tucked behind a curve of dead trees, barely visible but intact and clean, like someone still used it, but the windows were dark, and the lock on the door had rusted through and snapped clean. Offie stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the silence, not quiet silence even. My breath didn't echo even, my steps didn't stir the dust. Air felt pressurized, like a deep cave or a sealed vault, and the longer I stood there, the heavier it got, until I nearly dropped to my knees. Then I saw the radio-old analog, clunky, covered in dust, but turned on the light, flickering, slow and steady, red and green, and red and green, and red and green. I picked it up, and static burst through the room like a scream, but under it there was something else. Not a voice, not rhythm. It matched my heartbeat perfectly until it didn't. It got faster, then slower, then wrong, like it was mimicking something alive, but didn't understand what living was supposed to sound. Like I dropped the radio, and it didn't stop, just kept pulsing through the room, through the floor, through my spine, and I stumbled backward out the door into the cold air that now smelled like iron and moss, and Bone Eyes started running again with no idea where I was going, and that's when the trees changed. Again, they weren't real trees anymore. They were still tall and still rooted, but their bark had been etched with thousands of symbols, none of which I recognized, none of which repeated, and between the lines were small round holes, like someone had dug into them with a spoon or a cly. Didn't look too long. I didn't want to see what might be staring back from inside those holes, because the longer I looked, the more they seemed to move, and then the whisper returned, but not behind me, not around me, inside. It spoke through my pulse, through my breath, and it didn't use words at first. It used memories. I saw myself at age 7, hiding under the porch while my parents fought upstairs. The sound of their voices, perfectly recreated but twisted, slowed like a cassette melting in the sun. Then I saw my brother's face the moment we buried our dog out by the fence line, and his lips were moving, but what came out wasn't what he said. It was the whispered had taken my memories and changed. Bemoaned, the man. As I walked, the trail changed again. The ground now covered in white dust and small handprints, like something small had been crawling just ahead of me, dragging fingers through the earth. Then I saw the mirror, just a single cracked mirror, standing upright in the middle of the path, framed in wood and held by nothing visible. I looked into it, and my reflection didn't match. MIT looked like me, but older, too thin, pale eyes, darker teeth, too small, and it smiled without me smiling. Then it raised one hand and pointed behind me. Didn't want to look, but I didn't. Behind me was nothing, no trail, no trees, just blackness, and when I turned back, the mirror was gone, just gone. I started running again, even though I knew the trail wasn't real anymore. It bent when I blinked, it stretched when I breathed, and it narrowed so tight at times I had to turn sideways to pass through. The air tasted like copper, and then I saw the manor, something shaped like a man. He stood off the trail at the edge of a dried stream, no clothes, no features, just a silhouette cut from the wrong material, like he was made of static and silence. He didn't move, but the whisper stopped. Everything stopped, like the forest was holding its breath, and when I stepped forward, he stepped back exactly the same amount, perfectly mirrored, like a shadow walking in reverse. Then he opened his mouth wide to widen. Inside it wasn't a throat, it was more stones, just stone stacked on stone, all the way down like a tunnel, and something moved behind them. I ran. This time the trail didn't change. It stayed the same, but it felt longer, more twisted, more deliberate, like it was leading me now, like I wasn't walking, but being drawn forward by something bigger than fear. The trees thinned again. I reached the lake, a place I had never seen on any map perfectly. still perfectly flat, surrounded by stones that now pulsed faintly in the dark, and in the center of the lake a single stone tower rose from the water, narrow, thin, impossibly taloned. A staircase spiraled around it, leading up into the fog, and at the base of the tower was a door open, waiting, and the whisper inside me said, "One thing, go home," and I stepped into the water. I didn't tell anyone about the stone. I carried it in my pocket like a secret, like a weight I had agreed to bear. And each night when I closed my eyes, I felt the fog curl behind them. I heard the tower breathing beneath my ribs. I heard my own voice asking questions I never wanted answered. I tried to live normally, tried to ignore how mirrors no longer reflected me at the right angle, how my voice didn't echo when I spoke alone. Tried to forget that I left something behind and brought something else back, but time doesn't move the same once you've touched the stones. Days melted into nights without meaning. Food lost taste, water lost weight, silence felt heavier than thunder. And then one morning I looked out my window and saw a man standing across the street. He wore my face, not close, not similar, but exact, and he smiled when he saw me, that same too flat, too many smile. And I knew he was waiting, not to follow me, but to become me, to step into my place. Once I stepped out, and I knew I had already started to forget my way back. My name felt lighter in my mouth each time I spoke it. My reflection showed him a little more, and me a little less. So I drove. I didn't pack. I didn't write a note. I just drove west, through towns that blurred like old photographs, through forests that bent toward me, as if welcoming something familiar. And when I reached the Bitterroot Mountains again, the trailhead was already waiting. The sign still read, "Shivering Stones, Trailhead." But now the letters were cracked like dry bone. The path wound in a direction I didn't remember, but my feet followed without asking. And I felt the fog return, not around me, but inside me, like a second set of lungs. And every step I took felt like a memory I didn't have yet. Deeper and deeper, until the light behind me folded in on itself, like a page closing. And there it was, the tower. But this time, it wasn't broken or covered in fog. It stood clear against the sky, which had no sun, clouds only gray like old breath. I didn't climb. I waited at the base, and when the door opened, I saw him again. The version of me who had once sat in the chair, who had once left. He looked tired, more human than before, and he spoke not with words, but with understanding. He stepped out, and I stepped in. No fight, no fear, only the exchange, because that's what the Shivering Stones do. They keep balance, one in, one out, one forgotten, one remembered, one voice returned, one voice buried. And as I sat in the chair again, I closed my eyes and let the whispers take shape. They told me stories in voices, not mine, but familiar, of hikers who vanished and became trail markers, of names etched into bark that no longer matched any living soul. And I understood. My place wasn't to escape. It was to hold the door, to remember for those who forgot, to whisper back when the world went quiet and far away, in a warm bed, in a room filled with sunlight. Someone who looked like me opened their eyes and smiled, and the stone on their nightstand turned to dust. You like to continue with final reflections, or end the story here, with the last whisper calling someone new to the trailhead.